Drug companies spend heavily on telling and retelling their version of this story. That's actually their in-house trade name for it, the drug story. According to the industry narrative, monopolies and the outsized profits they generate can alone incentivize and deliver innovation. The system is working just fine. Any interference will cost humanity dearly. The following account is told from the perspective of the dissenters, critics, and antagonists who see this as a dishonest and dangerous fiction. These figures have shadowed and challenged the development of medical monopoly at every step, issuing democratic echoes of the English King Henry IV, who in 1404 decreed it a felony to multiply gold or silver or use the craft of multiplication by alchemic means. The act against multipliers wasn't about shutting down pagan rituals or taking a stand against supernatural criminality. It was a preemptive strike against private wealth becoming private power, strong enough to challenge the authority of the crown. Centuries later, the same fear inspired spirited Republican opposition to monopoly in the North American colonies. This hostility survived the founding and continues to make cyclical appearances of varying intensity. Since World War II, the pharmaceutical industry has provided a sitting target for the country's deep, if suppressed, democratic instinct to favor broad public interests over narrow private ones. Over the last 7 decades, the industry has become a target so fat and unmissable that taking a swing at it unblindfolded almost feels unfair. But its grotesque girth is the very thing that has allowed it to become so devilishly elusive. As Henry IV, Thomas Jefferson, and Louis Brandeis understood, if you allow the unnatural multiplication of private wealth, eventually its power will slip all social constraints. You will wake up one day to find Merlin wearing the crown. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's famous speech to the 1936 Democratic Convention was a warning against this scenario coming to pass. Though Roosevelt declared war against unnamed economic royalists, the New Dealers understood the real targets to be the invisible sources of their awesome power, the weak regulations, bad laws, and corrupted statutes that enabled monopolies to dominate the economy and threaten the country's experiment in self-government. Patents were a major concern of the late New Deal, but not drug patents specifically, not quite yet. In the 1930s, the pharmaceutical industry was in the final throes of a painful molting process. It was shedding the last vestiges of its own anti-monopoly tradition and assuming the mindset and characteristics of those new economic dynasties thirsting for power, fingered in Roosevelt's speech. Anyone listening to that speech, from the worlds of academic research, drug manufacture, corner druggery, or organized medicine, must have heard echoes of the sulphurous anti-monopoly sermons that had filled the broad canopy of American medicine for as long as anybody could remember. The drug industry had mostly severed its connection to this tradition by the end of World War II, when the U.S. government began to nest the biggest bounty of scientific research the world had ever seen. The contest between public and private interests vying for guardianship of this science runs throughout this book. That storyline is charged by the inherent tension created by granting medical knowledge, or any knowledge, the same property status as a clarinet or a tractor. We've become dulled to the strangeness of it. But the concept of intellectual property remains profoundly counterintuitive, if not paradoxical. If you possess a milking cow, and your neighbor steals that cow, you have lost your cow. Consult any culture, East or West, ancient or modern, and some form of revenge or legal remedy would be prescribed. If, however, you discovered a process for making cow's milk healthier or safer to drink, and your neighbor imitated the method to make his cow's milk healthier or safer, the balance of opinion would swing against the judgment that a theft or any other punishable crime had occurred. This is because your neighbor's possession of your idea does not reduce your store of it. In fact, the opposite is true. Scientific knowledge, especially related to food and medicine, is a public good whose benefits, say maximizing vaccine production at the lowest cost during a pandemic, increase the more broadly the knowledge is diffused. Economists call such goods non-rivalous. In Thomas Jefferson's formulation, he who receives an idea from me receives instruction himself without lessening mine, as he who lights his taper at mine receives light without darkening me. It is often observed that our current social and economic system imbues oppressive feelings of inevitability and permanence. A shrinking historical horizon doesn't help. If you believe something has always been some way, it is difficult to imagine changing it. This is apparent in the current debate over the waiving of